This is chapter 12 of Converging Media, about communication law and regulation in the digital age. First thing the book talks about, of course, is the First Amendment. The First Amendment guarantees the Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of speech, press, or religion. Now, I read an article a long time ago that said there's no such thing as free speech, and it's a good thing too. As you may or may not know, you are not free to yell fire in a crowded theater. That will get you prosecuted. There are restrictions on speech, and restrictions on speech, I believe, for the most part, maybe not always, but for the most part, and maybe not enough, in a right and a good way. Talks about the fourth estate being an unofficial branch of the government, and it has to be free from government censorship or control if it is going to hold the government accountable to the people for the things that they've done, sometimes that they've done wrong, sometimes that they need to really be held accountable for. If a government can use means to control the media, it can jail. If it can jail journalists or editors, it can silence them, produce what's called a chilling effect, and that's what happens when the journalists or other media producers decide not to publish stories or a topic after a journalist has been punished or jailed for such a story. And so the government does not have the freedom to do that type of thing. It does talk about national security and the Alien and Sedition Acts. These acts prohibited things along the line of encouraging the overthrow of the government and subverting the nation's constitution or laws. Now, there are questions that a lot of people have now about, well, where should that line be drawn? That's something that we talked about in class. I wish we were in class to talk about it right now. It talks about the clear and present danger. Can be a restriction on speech when it meets one of the following criteria. It's intended to incite or produce dangerous activity, as again, fire in a crowded theater. It's likely to succeed in achieving that purported result. But another issue is prior restraint, where the government prevents or blocking the publication of media content. This is done only in cases of serious or grave threats to national security. In other words, if you have gotten hold of documents that are classified and it is a threat to national security, the government has been able to block the publication of certain things along that line. The preferred position balancing theory is a legal theory that says a balance must be struck between speech and other rights, although speech has a preferred position. Now, the next thing the book talks about is libel and slander. Speaking of things that we're not free to just yell or say or whatever that we might do or write. We're not free to slander someone where we defame their character, or if it's written, libel them in a way that damages their reputation or otherwise causes them harm. And the key here is you damage their reputation, cause them harm, and this is something that they did not do. In other words, if it's true, then it's not slander or libel. Only if it is, something where the person's done this to defame you, to hurt you, and they know that it's not true, or there's no chance that it could have been true or something along that line. There are some lines there that are drawn as well. The way to remember this, by the way, is slander is spoken and libel is written. S equals S and L equals L. Libel's done with letters on a page, and slander is spoken. S equals S. To protect journalists against libel, there are some steps that a journalist can take. Make sure they have thorough research, confirm the identity of the target of your report. That way you're not saying it about someone else. Try to use quotations whenever possible. Report only the facts and avoid language that draws conclusions. Have you ever noticed on the daily news, morning or evening news, either one, they're talking about a crime that was committed. They've arrested the person for the alleged crime for allegedly having done this. They're protecting themselves. To avoid bias in reports and strive for balance. Now, there are shield laws intended to protect journalists from legal challenges to their freedom to report news, and those are important laws as well. There are people who challenge those laws. There are even people in the government who don't like those laws. Moving to page 331 talks about censorship. Censorship is most common in two circumstances: during wartime, when content may threaten national security, or with pornographic or obscene content, which can sometimes include graphic violence or detailed accounts of criminal behavior. And so there are things where censorship has been upheld as not a violation of the First Amendment. And so talks about the censorship of comics. things that comics have had in them that have been censored at times. Then there was the creation of comic magazine publishers formed a comics code authority which banned certain sexual content and most graphic material popular in many horror comics of the day. The Hays Code introduced 3 moral principles to prevent the production of any motion picture that would lower the moral standards of those who see it. It needed to present correct standards of life, and no picture was to ridicule natural or human law. Before the Hays Code came along, there were a lot of the early movies, even some of the ones I believe that were called before sound, they were silent movies. There were a number of them that did have nudity in it. It talks about indecent content. There's been rules that broadcasters may not air indecent speech when children are likely to be in the audience between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. Going forward, it talks about obscenity. What is obscenity? They look at obscenity. I'm not going to get into that for your lecturing right now. You can look that up. Criticism, ridicule, or humor. There have been restrictions when there are things based on race, religion, gender, national background, other factors, or that kind of thing are protected speech. However, there are certain things where colleges have actually enacted rules where hate speech and words that are likely to trigger very violent responses on a college campus can be limited, can be restricted. So that's something important for you to know. We're going to go forward to regulating electronic media. I'm not going to get into some of these dates. If that's something you're interested in the history of that, you can go back into that yourself. I'm not going to go through and just recite all of that. It's in your book. It is in your book. One of the things that the concept of the FCC talks about universal service at quality services at reasonable and affordable rates, and access to advanced telecommunication and information services throughout the United States, access in rural and in high-cost areas. And there's a number of things like that you might want to look through. Going forward, talks about regulating commercial and free speech. The FTC enforces antitrust and consumer protection laws. Cases of deception and advertising in the media. The FDA is responsible for deceptive advertising claims for food and drugs. And I mentioned that, I think, in the last chapter, how in regard to, or an earlier chapter in regard to advertising, there has to be some honesty there, or you can get called on that. You can be fined. You can be told to take down ads. Commercial speech, of course, is basically speech where we're advertising things. There have been bans on tobacco and marijuana advertising. However, there were restrictions on liquor, advertising hard liquor for a while that was just done voluntarily by the liquor industry, but then they've abandoned that and gone back to advertising. Forward to political speech, there is the equal time rule. There should be equal opportunities for candidates that are for the same office. If you put one on the air, you need to allow the other time in the air to respond to that. Candidate debates, by the way, are exempt from the equal time rule provisions. So because, and this happens to be the night of the last presidential debate, because Donald Trump and Joe Biden will debate tonight, does not mean that that the networks now have to give equal time to some of the minority party candidates who do not have the standing in terms of that political party or the percentage of support. The fairness doctrine says that broadcasters should seek out and present all sides of a controversial issue. Tell me when the last time you saw that done. Tell me honestly, have you seen CNN do that? Have you seen the MSNBC do that? Have you seen Fox News do that? If it is there, it is rare, just to be blunt. If it is there, it is rare. Children's programming protections, the Children's Television Act, you can go into that if you want to. I'm not going to get into some of that. Talks about intellectual property rights, the ideas that have commercial values, such as literary and artistic works, have copyright protection, so that you can't just take somebody's book, go make it into a movie or a TV show without getting permission from that person or the people, possibly families, who own the copyright on it, depending on how old it is. Trademarks, of course, protect images, designs, logos, even words or phrases. Going forward now into fair use, the concept of fair use. There are limited exceptions. Fair use, such as a movie or book review, where the reviewer might include an excerpt of it And that's considered a fair amount where you're not really stealing from it. Rather, you're reviewing it, showing a small excerpt from it that allows you to review it and explain why the movie is well done or not well done, whatever it may be like that. There are amounts that you can excerpt of copyrighted work, but you cannot do it in its entirety without entering into problems with financial and infringing on copyright. It talks about privacy. All members of the public appearing on shows such as reality shows must sign a waiver granting permission to use their image. Live sporting events, however, do not require such waivers. You ever notice that sometimes on certain shows, whether it's a reality show, they're showing a crowd, and there'll be people that they show and the people that they blur out, and that's because they have to get waivers from people to show them on the air. Certain settings they do. Okay, now as we know, our privacy has been infringed on a great deal in the media age with cookies, where they spyware, where they look at what it is you're doing. One of the things you need to understand is when on your cell phone, you've given most of the people on your cell phone permission to listen to your daily activity all day long, all day long. If you don't think that's true, try talking on your phone about how much you need a certain product, and then watch how many ads pop up in Facebook and other places for those products. That is going to be the end of chapter 11. I'll try to get this one in chapter 10 up, and I'm hoping to get 12 done soon.